Hello everyone and welcome back to another installment from our webinar series Straight from the Horse's Mouth. A life cycle assessment can assess the environmental impacts of your product, service or whole industry. But how does it provide value to your business? This webinar explains why New Zealand Avocado commissioned an LCA study and how they plan to use the data to continue building their environmental credentials. Here's a sneak preview.
An LCA basically tells your story when the study and findings are communicated internally or externally. And having an LCA study reviewed basically validates the study and conclusions. It increases trust in its results. So you can go on to tell your story, by producing nutshell studies, sharing the LCA report with interested parties, if that is the goal of the study, and also by progress to creating things like environmental product declarations, or EPDs.
Consultation with our growers and industry stakeholders revealed that economic resilience, worker safety and well-being, and environmental stewardship were key challenges as well as opportunities as a sector. We recognise that keeping businesses profitable is key to enabling the activities that support better environmental outcomes, and as a primary sector, we strive to reach that balance between food supply, profitability, social well-being, and improving environmental standards. All right, some key learnings. This new understanding of what inputs and activities are actually contributing to our environmental footprint is now allowing us to focus on specific areas as we prepare for the future. An example is the inevitable adaptation as an industry we will have to make to changing climates, which for horticulture presents this, what I call a vicious cycle, where climate change is predicted to make pest pressures worse, ultimately increasing pesticide use, which can then further contribute to the release of greenhouse gas emissions. So what can we do as an industry to look towards more cultural methods of pest control, as an example?
Brad Siebert is the Deputy of New Zealand Avocado. He will explain what the study found and how they're communicating this to customers, including wholesale customers, growers, local councils, government and local communities. He'll join Gaya Gamage, our Head of Quality Assurance, to discuss how a verified LCA study can help you tell your story. With that, let's get started.
Hello and a warm welcome back to our webinar series. My name is Gaya Gamage, Senior Sustainability Specialist at thinkstep-anz. I'm your host for the next half an hour. Today we are joined by Brad Siebert, Deputy CEO at New Zealand Avocado. It's great to have such a big audience today, and some of you might not know us, so just a couple of words about us. We're passionate about enabling organizations to succeed sustainably, and we help with detailed studies like life cycle assessment, carbon footprinting, green financing, and strategic sustainability projects. We have been doing this for over 15 years in Australia and New Zealand. Our guest today is Brad Siebert, Deputy CEO, New Zealand Avocado. Brad has both technical and operational experience in biosecurity, market access, trade policy, integrated pest management, sustainability, and natural resource management. For the last 10 years, Brad has led these areas of work for the New Zealand avocado industry. Brad will come back to us next, but let's get started. Verified LCA to tell your story. Most of us here will have some idea of what LCA is, but to recap, LCA is a tool that allows us to measure different types of environmental impact, such as carbon footprint, water scarcity, acidification, and so on. We can analyze many types of products, anything from avocados to a skyscraper, for example, and services too. LCA helps us to understand hotspots in a life cycle so that we can focus on efforts to improve those areas. It also shows trade-offs that we'll be facing when making changes, so that when we are making changes, we can be confident that we're not shifting the impact to another part of the organization or value chain. So the idea is life cycle thinking so that we can avoid solving one problem by creating another. There are 4 main steps when doing an LCA as guided by ISO 14040 and 14044, which are the main LCA standards. Here we have expanded the steps to include the process followed by practitioners when conducting an LCA. We'd start by establishing goal and scope of the study, and then move on to collecting data for processes involved. Then we'll check to ensure the data makes sense and is correct and complete. Once we have all the data, we'll model using software and carry out impact assessment using software. The impact assessment provides us with the results, which are then reported alongside details of the study in terms of the study's goal and scope and life cycle inventory, and all the analysis, such as the hotspot analysis, scenario analysis, and sensitivity analysis. This report can be used for internal purposes, or it can be published depending on the goal of the study. In the case of New Zealand Avocado study, Shriyazi Majumdar and Professor Sarah McLaren from the New Zealand's Lifecycle Management Centre conducted the LCA. So they're the practitioners, and I reviewed the study. I'll focus on review for the rest of this session, including when an LCA can be reviewed, who can review an LCA study, what's done during the review, and where to from there. Depending on the study, the LCA may be critically reviewed or verified. The study can be reviewed at different points of the process. It can be reviewed after the scope definition. For example, you can review it to check the functional unit, to check that it's adequate. The functional unit is quite important. It is the quantified performance of a product system for use as a reference unit. So it is your reference unit. And for example, the New Zealand Avocado study, the functional unit is 1 kilogram of Hass avocados produced in New Zealand. The review can also be done during data collection stage to check that the scope of the system is sufficiently included in data. Then the bulk of the review will be focused on the actual LCA study report that comes out at the end. Overall, a review can be done at any significant step on the basis that problems can be identified and corrected at an early stage. This could mean that it takes more time to complete the study, but also means less work, less rework towards the end. In the case of New Zealand Avocados, study, we looked at the initial goal and scope stage. We also checked the data collection templates and then focused on the main part of the study, which is the report. An LCA can be reviewed by an internal or external expert independent of the LCA. It can be reviewed by a single party or a panel of experts. If you are seeking to publish or support claims related to a single product LCA, your LCA study can be reviewed by a single party. This was the case with the New Zealand Avocado study. If you are using a comparative LCA to support comparative assertions that you intend to then disclose to the public, then the ISO standards require that a review is conducted by a panel of minimum of 3 people. This includes a panel chair and 2 other interested parties. So overall, the reviewer should be a qualified in LCA. Perhaps they can be a life cycle assessment certified professional, an LCACP expert with current experience in LCA. And they can also be an expert in the scientific discipline that is relevant to the study. That comes in very handy if you are doing a panel review. External reviewers are recommended because this can prevent bias and by allowing a degree of separation. But there is a monetary cost involved with external review. What is actually done during a review? A full LCA report is required for full compliance to standards. So once Sarah and Shriyazi finish the study, they send the report to me for the review. And at this point, we'll check whether the methods used to carry out the LCA are sound. So are they consistent with standards? Are the methods scientifically and technically valid? We'll also check the data used. Is the data appropriate in relation to the study goal and scope? Are the assumptions used valid? Is the data complete? Then we'll check on the interpretation. Do the findings satisfy the goal of the study? Does the interpretation reflect any of the limitations that's been identified? Then overall, we'll have a look at is the study report transparent and consistent? So the LCA practitioner is sent a list of comments based on the findings of the review. These include, for example, questions where clarifications of methodology or assumptions are needed, and also contain recommendations for changes to the study or report if required. The practitioner then responds to comments, resolves issues, and submits the work for another round of review. Generally, there will be a number of rounds of review as agreed with the verifier beforehand, until the work, and this happens until the work is deemed robust and in line with the requirements of standards. Then the reviewer issues a review statement once everything is satisfactory. A review statement is needed stating the conclusions of the review. For external reviews, the review statement, comments, recommendations made by the reviewer, as well as the practitioner's responses should be included in the LCA report. So now you have a reviewed LCA study. That's not the end of the journey. It's so an LCA basically tells your story when the study and findings are communicated internally or externally. You have your robust LCA study. What you can do with that internally is to see if, use it to support changes within. It can also be used for marketing with confidence. And having an LCA study reviewed basically validates the study and conclusions. It increases trust in its results. So you can go on to tell your story, by producing nutshell studies, sharing the LCA report with interested parties, if that is the goal of the study, and also by progress to creating things like environmental product declarations, or EPDs. So overall, the review process makes LCA robust and trustworthy. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Brad.
I just wanted to reiterate a very good point you made around the importance of engaging early in the review or verifier with the verifier. We did that obviously very on with around the scope and the questionnaires that went out, and specifically not just to make sure this study was sound. We asked ThinkStep to look beyond the study to an environmental product declaration to ensure the questions and data we were collecting were actually going to be able to be robust enough to use that information and data in a much broader sense as well. So my talk today is focused on the reasons why the avocado industry in New Zealand is pursuing a more sustainable future, and specifically how we plan to get there. I'll discuss the local, international and commercial drivers for some of our work, and I'm sure many of those, although focused on horticulture for my talk, will have parallels for many other sectors as well. As an industry producing an amazingly nutritious fruit, we believe we have a great story to tell. That is a sector that's healthy for the people and the land that we grow on. We now have a job to put some evidence around those bold claims, which is the reason we engaged in this study in the first place. We recognise we have a significant natural advantage in New Zealand with plentiful rainfall and a lack of damaging pests to manage, but understanding how we can do better was the focus of our work. We use the respectful harvest ethos to differentiate avocados grown in and exported from New Zealand. We're really confident in the credentials sitting behind this, as our members right across the supply chain are complying with a number of mandatory requirements focused on fruit quality, food safety, market access and resource management. Consultation with our growers and industry stakeholders revealed that economic resilience, worker safety and well-being, and environmental stewardship were key challenges as well as opportunities as a sector. We recognise that keeping businesses profitable is key to enabling the activities that support better environmental outcomes. And as a primary sector, we strive to reach that balance between food supply, profitability, social well-being, and improving environmental standards. Social sustainability is probably one area that we are less engaged in around capturing some data or case studies in. But from labour support initiatives, minimum wages under law, to ensuring safe workplaces, all parts of the industry is committed to improving the well-being of our growers and our very, very diverse workforce. I guess now for the why. Why are we doing this work? As many of you will know, the scope and meaning of sustainability is ever-changing, driven by the rapid progress of new scientific knowledge, innovation, and shifting social norms and values. From a consumer perspective, environmental impacts of food production are still not well understood, and that was reiterated to us with a global audience as we had our Avocado Congress last month. Currently, only a niche group of consumers are willing to pay a premium for sustainability claims. Some sector and business leaders see this as a cost of entry, not a point of difference. Yet with the demand for ethical food production likely to grow and move past environmental reporting to more substantiated claims around working conditions and cultural practices, the focus will extend beyond just product differentiation to the ability to enter and develop whole segments of a market. For governments and investors, there's an increasing demand for transparency around sustainability credentials as a license to operate or invest. Countries as a whole are now having to report on progress they're making towards reducing their greenhouse gas emissions in order to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. In future, sustainability-related border taxes may be applied through trade and broaden to include a greater emphasis on evidence-based water and carbon footprints. We are already seeing some of this at the market access and retailer level through the European Green Deal to provide reliable sustainability claims. In recent workshops I've attended, many are describing this as the new trade barrier. For growers, their service providers, our post-harvest operators, and all those parts of the supply chain that work to produce and export avocados, compliance is increasing at all levels, with further pressure for sustainability-related accountability. And many of you will know that's led to a proliferation of standards aimed at certifying these claims. New versions of Global Gap, our industry assurance programs, once focused on just food safety, now do extend to environmental stewardship and ethical work conditions. So we're linking all the above to the current challenges facing the global avocado sector, and I'm sure many other sectors as well. High volumes in future will lead to an increasingly competitive market where supermarkets or buyers, in other cases, will simply have the opportunity to seek and therefore prioritise those products offering certified environmental and social warranties. Staying ahead of these new expectations will determine your future right to play in an increasing number of markets who are needing to satisfy both consumer expectations and national policies aimed at reducing resource use and greenhouse gas emissions. I guess the basis of the talk, what are we doing to stay ahead? So to understand the environmental performance of New Zealand avocados, the industry commissioned the life cycle assessment. I won't go too much into it, but it, as Gaya said, evaluates the environmental attributes of a product across all stages of the value chain. The scope of our study spanned right across the supply chain, from production through to markets in Asia and our own domestic trade. With all inputs and industry activities now categorised and modelled, it allows us to now track progress and provide insights into the impact of proposed practice changes prior to investment. Examples being a new packaging type or fertiliser type, or even its origin, which can now be tested in the modelling systems that we've used to fully understand its influence on our total carbon footprint before we engage in those practice change or investments. Based on our own consultation and the future drivers I discussed earlier, our LCA focus areas were our carbon footprint, eutrophication, water footprint, and ecotoxicity. Waste was also raised in consultation with all of our members, and although inorganic orchard inputs are minimal, the wider supply chain is working to minimise food loss and reduce, recycle or reuse synthetic resources. An example being a regional pilot program to understand the viability of insect digesters at our oil and processing sites to turn waste streams into high-value animal feed and fertiliser, reducing again that carbon footprint with that product not now going to compost. Our study, as far as metrics, looked across 53 orchards based on region, size and performance, and across multiple post-harvest facilities and export operators. This was not a comparative study, so I get to talk very positively about it and say we had fantastic results, and we continue to learn more as we further interpret the data. Values across all the modelled impact categories were at the lowest end of the range in all other global studies where they have been calculated, yet being the first to quantify this at such an in-depth and industry-wide level, it remains difficult to draw those straight comparisons. We therefore, obviously, at our Congress and wider, we welcome more collaborative research in this area. The results were extremely interesting as well. Whilst being able to benchmark the industry's carbon and water footprint, the different areas of the supply chain that contributed to these were surprising, to me at least. An example being when looking at our carbon footprint on the left, shipping and transport in dark green, that often dominates some export sector LCAs, actually contributed the least to our overall carbon footprint when looking at our trade with Australia. Conversely, our water footprint in the middle donut there was not solely dominated by orchard level or production site activities. This is maybe for another audience, but I had to make this point at our Congress that there is real clarity in the difference between water use and water footprint. A water footprint accounts for the water used and how that has an impact on the available fresh water remaining. Our water scarcity index in the regions that we grow was low, and consequently our impact or footprint on the remaining available water for the ecosystem and community was exceptionally low. So that was a really positive story. All right, some key learnings. This new understanding of what inputs and activities are actually contributing to our environmental footprint is now allowing us to focus on specific areas as we prepare for the future. An example is the inevitable adaptation as an industry we will have to make to changing climates, which for horticulture presents this, what I call a vicious cycle, where climate change is predicted to make pest pressures worse, ultimately increasing pesticide use, which can then further contribute to the release of greenhouse gas emissions. So what can we do as an industry to look towards more cultural methods of pest control, as an example? Learnings for me were the orchard or production level contributions attributed to fertilizer and agrochemicals were not in the actual application or emission of these on orchard, but the bulk of carbon emissions were from the production phase and transport of these to New Zealand. I often talk about the holy grail in sustainability as finding a compelling link between practices that are both profitable and improve environmental performance. So it was very exciting to confirm that through the study, a strong connection between productivity and overall sustainability outcomes, which means making our industry more economically resilient makes it more environmentally sustainable too. New Zealand's Climate Change Response Act, driven by that Paris Agreement, means New Zealand businesses must be net zero carbon by 2050, making this level of investigation fundamental to understanding where our own supply chain should be focused to meet these future targets. Like with many, we are a global industry, so all parts of the supply chain are part of the conversation and therefore part of our research. I therefore wanted to acknowledge the shipping sector, who is committed to some step change improvements in the way it operates, and for some looking to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040 through new ship design and alternative fuels. So I've just listed there some two emission reduction measures that are effective from this year. So I thought I'd raise those. So looking ahead, this is my last slide. How are we going to use these insights to improve our industry's environmental and business performance? As I've listed there, it'll definitely allow us to guide the industry to use water as efficiently and as responsibly as possible. We are doing research to better understand fertilizer loss from our orchards so that we can optimize its use. We are looking at alternative production systems to reduce resource use, land area, and other inputs, and alternative options to manage pests and disease, as I mentioned. We will continue where we can to collect further environmental data and report on that sustainability progress. I've heard some say no matter what your results are as a sector or an industry with some LCA results, it's better to put the warts and all study out there and actually show that you're a transparent and responsible industry and have some goals in place to work towards. A big one for me as I work with the regional council and advocate for the industry with at the national level with environmental policy is being able to advocate with regulators for some science-based policy. And of course, we want to work alongside anyone we can to learn and share data. So that's me, and I'm sure we're both happy to take questions.
Are the requirements for review, example, comparison study the same in different regions? If you are using ISO standards for doing your LCA, then yes, the requirements would be very similar across different regions. For a comparative study, you'll need a panel of experts. The second question is, do the proposed PEF regulations in Europe require third-party review? Yes, PEF regulation, the PEF, they're basically standardized LCA. So they're very similar to the LCA requirements for review. External review is required. And we have a question on nutrient losses quantifying phosphate. What about nitrogen? If we are talking about the eutrophication indicator, then yes, it would take into account any other outputs that are emitted to the environment into that quantified with the category. So it's not just phosphate.
And just as a follow-up to that, obviously nitrogen is a big topic around some environmental policy at the moment. So the research that I pointed to, yes, we've got some indicators here, but our research is specifically looking at not elemental nitrogen as well as other fertilizer attributes as well.
Is there something in the pipeline that would allow for comparative study with other country of origin, given the barrier negative views of avocados have in some markets for some consumers?
Yeah, I mean, we and that was a big topic at our Congress where we had a global sector there. We would love more and more countries to engage and do that granular level of research as we have done. That we have done. There are commercial entities doing some LCA study who are avocado producers and exporters. I guess we're the only ones that have done it at an industry-wide level across so many orchards. Yeah, we come across the challenge of what does this mean? How do we make it meaningful? You know, we've got a carbon footprint there and a water footprint now, but they are just results in isolation. And so a lot of the time that we present the study, people say, so what? You know, what does that mean? And so 100% we are looking for some way to make that meaningful, whether that's comparative or not, because we spoke at the Congress about taking back the narrative around sustainability, to your point. And we have to do that potentially as a global sector and not work against each other.
Point on productivity and sustainability well made, but this would normally play against an organic category growth and will likely also impact on biodiversity. Is the avocado industry looking at a category-centric approach to account for different consumer drivers?
It's a good point. Obviously, all of our members are looking for us to drive outcomes for avocados from New Zealand. Rather than align or categorize, as you say, different production types or methods and labeling those differently, if I've understood the question. So I think there'll definitely have to be some investigation to understand whether there's a differentiation or value add story there. But at the moment, it is at an industry-wide avocados from New Zealand level.
Thank you for your questions and for your responses, Brad. And with that, thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you at the next webinar.